This week on To the Contrary.
Femvertising. It works for companies. Is it inspiring a new wave of feminism? Then, the smear campaign against a woman who carried a mattress to bring attention to her charge of rape. Behind the headlines, Food Security Part 2.
Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, femvertising.
The term femvertising refers to a trend in advertising that's gaining traction. Think Dove's Real Beauty campaign, now more than a decade old. It was designed to challenge gender norms and honor and reflect real women. Companies such as Walmart, Celine, and Under Armour have followed suit and are now sporting pro-female ads, selling women's empowerment along with their products. For example, Celine uses 80-year-old writer Joan Didion as one of its models. A 2014 She Knows Femvertising survey found more than half of women say they bought a product because they liked how the marketer and its ads presented women. 43% said it made them feel good about supporting the brand.
So if it's working, Erin Matson, for marketing purposes and women are buying this stuff, how's it working for female equality?
That's a great question. What I'd say is it's a good step for the advertising, but we have to get real if we think the feminist revolution is going to be led by Madison Avenue.
Bonnie, I'm very optimistic about it. I think it's fabulous. I mean, again, it's emphasizing the notion that women are becoming a powerhouse in terms of the consumer. They're now 58% of online retail buyers and wealth creators.
Well, I'll tell you, trendy marketing to women's equality may be smart, but hijacking feminism for commercial purposes isn't. And there's a difference.
And this is a great opportunity to show how markets work. If women want more empowered advertisement, they'll buy these products. And I think that we could really see a trend and we could see more ads like this. So it's a great opportunity to see that demand. I'm
curious why you think it isn't good for equality. I think it's great that these good old boys networks are finally, putting an 80-year-old woman as their model for high-end luxury retail items.
Yeah, if you align the marketing to your brand instead of just sticking on a feminist sticker in the hope of attracting women. If you think it through, I'd be all for it. But I think there's a real and not so subtle difference between the two, and we ought to look carefully at what's happening. The Dove ad is very different from somebody saying, look, there are women out here, we better find a way to insert them into this ad.
Right, but don't you think, forget about what they're doing internally in the companies, and a lot of them are very hep on diversity and women in high places in the company, et cetera, et cetera. But even if they're not, if they're sending out a message of that this is what you should look like, Joan Didion, versus some 16-year-old bimbo who looks like a hanger on the runway, isn't that an improvement?
Yeah, sure it is. And if those are the kinds of ads we're going to get, fine. I'm just saying that the trend could run away with itself. These were ads where the marketing met the product and it made good sense and women were relieved to see it. I'm talking about seeing this flourishing. You could see women hop onto ads and wonder, what are they doing there?
I think it's good. 40 years ago, we had Betty Crocker, an apron in the kitchen, ironing. Now we have all shapes and sizes of women, all different colors of women, young and old. I think it's fantastic, and I think the trend will continue and be positive.
I sure hope so, because where things stand right now, it's pretty sick. Externally, you've got 50% of very young kids, afraid that they're fat, girls specifically. The number of fourth grade girls who've tried a fad diet is at 80%. And this is absolutely, there are studies that show that women and girls feel worse about themselves after consuming media. So we're bombarded with these terrible images, and people are sick and tired of that. So it's a good thing to see the tides turn. But I do want to also acknowledge that a lot of the problem is manufactured by the fact that the advertising industry operates basically like a frat house. You know, you've got 3% of creative directors are women, and so it's men who are controlling these messages that go out to women, and it's making everyone feel bad. So it's good to see change.
Well, I'm glad Erin brought up the men, because, you know, when you look at sitcoms, right, you see these men, there are very few true role models and strong men out there. So I think as we talk about advertisement, more empowering ads for women, I hope in the sitcom world we see a lot more for men, where you see, you know, really empowering characters as well.
Do you think that this could lead to a fourth wave of feminism? It was mentioned in one of the articles that was written about the trend that it's really stoking interest on the part of college women and making them realize, hey, you know, the whatever car it is, the Chevy, the Ford, the BMW that's being sold to you with a half-naked blonde on the hood is not the only way advertisers can try to reach you, but realizing as well that it's still in the minority to use real women.
Yeah, so my opinion on that is, A, it's very exciting that feminism is booming at the college level right now. But I actually think advertising is following the culture right now, that there is a demand right now for more empowering images of women and girls, and that's really what the marketers are tapping into. I don't think they're leading the charge. I think that they're following the horse.
Will it stoke more young women to get involved in working for women's rights?
Well, I'd actually say I don't think feminism is really having a rebirth on these college campuses. A national poll found that only 23% of Americans self-identify as feminists. I think many are finding that it's gone too far on some issues and doesn't relate to the true experience that they have, too much of a victim mentality that we're seeing in feminism, and not recognizing the great opportunities that we have in this country.
No, women have incorporated feminism into who they are. So feminism is not a label as it was for my generation, but you are very much mistaken if you think that this generation of millennials are not natural-born feminists. And I do think that they will lead the way to a different way to thinking about women, if not only because of the way they see rape and other issues as former.
Well, I'm just hoping they find their way into the boardroom as CEOs, as leaders. I'm delighted that the head of GM is a woman, a CEO. She's taking a very public profile, and that's where women have to take leadership positions in politics, business, and in other areas.
All right, let us know what you think. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnier Bay. From Femvertising to a campaign called Fake Rape.
After a year of carrying around a mattress to protest Columbia University's handling of her sexual assault complaint, Emma Sulkowicz now faces very public charges that she's lying about the attack. Using an anonymous Twitter account called Fake Rape, tweets chastise Sulkowicz for torturing an innocent man. Pictures of her with the mattress stamped #rapehoax are tweeted as well. Posters calling her a pretty little liar showed up on and around Columbia's campus just hours after Sulkowicz carried the mattress on stage during her graduation ceremony. Paul Nungesser, the student accused of the rape, filed a discrimination suit against the school, despite being cleared of the charge.
So, Congresswoman Norton, as soon as we learned about this story, the first thought was, is the UVA case, which was such a debacle in the Rolling Stone article where the woman making the allegations was found to be fabricating a lot of stuff, does that hurt Emma Sulkowicz?
Well, isn't it interesting that they're trying to relate the Sulkowicz case to the UVA case? And of course, it's interesting to note that I think in the long run it hasn't hurt the rape notion, the sexual assault notion on campus, because frankly it's so pervasive that it has survived that. And it's interesting to note that these anti-rape, anti-Sulkowicz responses have come out late, and they've come from anonymous sources where she has been entirely visible and painfully so in making her case and having an enormous effect, particularly on young women.
You agree?
Well,
Is she affected by the UVA case?
Yeah, I think the whole narrative is affected. I went to the University of Virginia. Our community was devastated by when that Rolling Stone article came out, and every student should be able to go to college and have a safe environment. I think one lesson we can learn from all of this is that universities really are ill-equipped to deal with sexual assault, and that we should be using the criminal justice system more.
I'd like to give the Title IX enforcement a chance at this point. It's still, yes, there are clearly tons of problems in the implementation at universities right now. That said, we've got to try something different. We've got to make a dent in this problem. College campus sexual assault is so pervasive. And I want to go back to Emma because I'm really concerned about this attack on her, this vicious attack on her. Online. I think it's an attack on all women. I think is an attempt to silence women and say, don't speak up about sexual assault, don't speak up when you've been victimized. And so I think it's something that we as a community really need to fight back against. I was also horrified to hear that when she carried her mattress across the stage during a graduation ceremony, that the president of Columbia University, Lee Bollinger, did not shake her hand. I found that very disheartening.
Well, what about the fact that the school has cleared him? What's going on here? Do we give any credence to that, or do we say, oh, it's just another university, my alma mater, by the way, undergrad and graduate school, for just another university kissing off some woman's allegations?
It's really more serious than that, and it's very difficult. When there's an allegation of rape, you really have a classic one-on-one. He said, she said, and it's almost impossible to get to the truth. Knowing that is why Sulkowicz, I think, carried her mattress. She knew that he'd been exonerated. She knew she didn't have, quote, proof, because the proof is impossible, and this is why it is so difficult to get to a way to solve this issue. Going into the criminal justice system won't make it any easier. If anything, the standard of proof gets raised. You've got to change the culture once these kids come into college. And it ought to begin the very first day with the way they're acclimated into college, with the sternest kind of understanding that these are verboten on campus, and then to work in the collegial way with women and with men to solve this problem so you can unravel this toxic culture.
But you're correct. It's a serious issue. It's impossible to know exactly what did happen. There were some journalistic interviews that took place that were indecisive in terms of really coming to any conclusions. And a couple of the interviewers were women, sympathetic to the issue, but after the interview, not finding definitive elements of what had taken place. Again, the allegation of rape is just as serious as rape itself. I don't have the answers, but I think this is what makes this issue a little bit more complex.
When you were at UVA, I'm curious, Karin, did you hear about other women who were raped on campus?
I mean, when I read the Rolling Stone article, I was very surprised. I was there for 7 years for undergrad and law school, and hadn't heard that song that outlined the entire article. So I think this reporter was looking for a story, was able to find somebody at UVA, and then tried to do a takedown of the university. And it's been very serious. The administration's taken it seriously, but I'm not sure it's doing a real service to the true victims.
All right. Last week, we looked at how a growing and more diverse population is demanding a greater variety of foods, more convenient foods, and seasonal foods year-round, all of which create cracks in U.S. food security. Today, we look at the vulnerabilities in our food transportation and distribution networks and the challenges of feeding a growing population in a finite world.
15% or more of the food we eat comes from other countries, and that number is rising every year. As we depend on other countries for food, the risk of disruption to our food sources and distribution system increases. For example, earlier this year, the Port of Los Angeles, the largest U.S. seaport, along with 29 other West Coast seaports, were virtually shut down by a labor dispute. The work stoppage created a logjam, lines of huge container ships going in and out of the ports, while shipping companies and truckers sat idle. The port slowdown was domestic and temporary, but other food disruptions could be more complicated. foreign regulatory laws, security and safety issues all have the potential to create large disruptions to imports. It has happened. In 2003, an estimated 1.7 million head of Canadian beef were stopped from entering the country by mad cow disease. And in February of 2015, Canada was hit again, confirming its first case of mad cow since 2011. During the years that Canadian beef was banned, another large U.S. trading partner filled the export beef gap, Mexico. But what might happen if the disease hit Mexico's cattle, or there was a security threat at the border and trade stopped, both considered highly plausible by experts? What if a coup took place in Thailand, whence much of our shrimp hails?
There's certainly some national security and food security issues with reliance on food from different countries. If you have areas that used to export to the United States but then become politically unstable and may end up exporting less, if anything at all, that would reduce the availability of that food.
Our most food insecure state is Hawaii. The islands import 85 to 90% of the food consumed there. That makes it very vulnerable to natural disasters and global events, disrupting food shipments. Preparing for these uncontrollable events, the Hawaii Department of Agriculture and Office of Planning created a food security and self-sufficiency strategy in 2012. The strategy described how the state could increase the amount of locally grown food and become less reliant on imports. And this year, the state is putting money behind concepts created to become more food secure and self-sufficient. It is also supporting the local fishing industry's efforts to promote sustainability and food security. Although imports pose many risks for food security, even food grown on our own soil can become vulnerable to shortages.
All you have to do is look at the problems with water in Arizona, California, and New Mexico and realize that we don't have sufficient water to meet our growing food demands.
Sure, we can feed 320 million people. Can we feed 520 million people by the time my grandkids are my age? And even if we can do that in the United States, is it good policy in terms of the globe?
Whether food is imported or domestically grown, getting it from the point of origin to the point of consumption requires multiple steps. From keeping it temperature controlled to handling it safely, require a variety of transport methods.
In the United States and globally, we have a very intricate, complicated network of how we source food and how it moves about. That complicated network has various points of vulnerability. Those points of vulnerability impact the security of the food, the safety of the food, and its risk for intentional contamination.
The government believes the food supply is so vulnerable that its transport was listed as one of the nation's 16 most critical infrastructure. That after the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001 by the Office of Homeland Security. This means a disruption is viewed as having dire consequences.
Times have changed, and with 325 million Americans, it's time for us to stabilize our population. In order to do that, we're going to have to reduce immigration substantially.
It's the job of the USDA and the FDA to keep our food safe in transit. But critics say the system is flawed, and rarely is a shipment stopped once it leaves the port of entry.
We have had foodborne illness outbreaks associated with transported food, produce, cross-contamination and transportation. Animal disease outbreaks associated with transportation of infected animals past non-infected farms can just disrupt our total production capacity. Transportation is necessary. It's also a risk.
This was not always the case. When the United States had a population of 170 million in the early 1950s versus 320 million today, many more people relied on the more reliable supply of locally grown foods. To protect themselves today from eating spoiled or diseased food ruined during transport, many American consumers are trying to return to that system. They have joined the locavore bandwagon. That means they only eat food that is locally produced. However, With each American consuming some 2,200 pounds of food per year and the population continuing to grow, the U.S.'s own food production capacity is questionable.
An increasing level of immigration certainly would affect the net imports of foods. But when the population goes up and we don't have necessarily much more arable land and we've reached the peak of productivity in the land, it means that either we're going to be exporting less food or importing more food.
If we want to stabilize our population, we will have to limit immigration. Currently, it's about 1.25 million annually. That's, again, got us on track to add a couple 100 million people to the U.S. population.
Even if the U.S. exports less to feed more people globally, some critics say that our methods of factory food farming, large industrial operations that raise large numbers of animals, are limiting the sustainability of our farming techniques.
That factory farmed animals depend on grain, be it soya or cereal.
One of the critical voices is Philip Limbury, the chief executive of Compassion in World Farming. He argues in his book, Farmageddon, that industrial model of food production and distribution is inefficient and risks long-term damage to the planet and long-term food insecurity.
Farmageddon exposes the true cost of cheap meat for our health, our countryside and the planet. It takes us beyond Compassion's heartland realm that factory farming is the biggest issue of animal cruelty on the planet and shows what it actually does to farmland birds, butterflies and bees in decimating them, shows what it does in terms of producing unhealthy, high saturated fat food, and shows that it squanders huge amounts of the planet's resources.
Researchers have agreed with Limbury. The Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research studied the food production capacity of every country in the world. The study indicates the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and Japan are already unable to meet the food requirements of their populations. The report also points out, as the population grows, interdependency grows too. More than half the world's population could depend on imported foods by the year 2050.
The reality is that our investment in agricultural research in the United States has been declining steadily over the last 30 years. It's a big problem, but we're not investing enough to solve it, and no other developing country is. So the farmers are faced with the challenges of meeting demands for the safe and healthful production of food, making it economic for the consumers so they can afford that food, and competing with producers around the world who don't have the same economic restraints on them from their cost of production. Farmers are in a very tough bind.
So Congresswoman Norton, just this month, a National Academy of Sciences report came out that said, among other things, it assessed the food supply available to more than 140 nations with populations greater than 1 million people, and demonstrates that food security is becoming increasingly susceptible to perturbations in demographic growth as humanity places increasing pressure on use of limited land and water resources. Are we doing anything about this as a country to try to make our food supply continue to make it abundant and affordable?
I mean, as your segment said, we're not doing the kind of research into farming and agriculture that we did that made this country the leading producer of agriculture. Isn't it amazing that only 15% of our food has to be or is imported? That makes us almost unique in the world.
But 90% of our fish, I don't eat meat, but I eat fish. That's a scary figure.
Yes, a combination of the cost of transportation. Remember, transportation costs so much now that we're beginning to do more manufacturing in this country. Combination of the cost of manufacturing and climate change, which is devastating, farming that could take place in other parts of the world, is calling upon our food supply and calling for changes in the way in which we do food security for ourselves and for the rest of the world.
One aspect I'm interested in on this topic is the port security side of it, which you mentioned a little bit in the segment. And as his last report that he released, Senator Coburn released a big review of the Department of Homeland Security, evaluating the 5 missions, one of which is port security, and really found that we are struggling in that area, that the DHS is struggling in all 5 missions. And I think that's something we need to reevaluate, and I hope Congress reevaluates.
Well, access to safe and healthy food should be rightfully considered a human right. We need this to live. And so this is something that we need to take very seriously.
But it seems to me that we don't take it seriously at all. We're not doing anything policy-wise to make sure that our food supply is available and abundant. What's going to happen?
Well, it's terrifying when you have corporations like Monsanto driving the bus that are driven by a profit motive and not necessarily feeding a maximum number of people in a healthy way. And so it is something that we're going to need a popular response. By that I mean this is an organizing problem in large part. We need grassroots conversation and pressure to build change.
But Bonnie,
All right,
you are correct.
That's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/tothecontrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week. I'm sorry, Clara, I was getting...
In that piece, the very controversial issue of what the science says.
Right, GMO.
GMO, I'm sorry.